Well, boys and ghouls, Shudder is back with more Creepshow. Hey everyone, Ryan Reed here, and we're talking about Shudder's original series, Creepshow. This is a Season 2 review, based of course on the classic film series of the same name. And last year I reviewed Season 1, around the time it started airing on AMC, even though it had been out on Shudder for a little bit. And my basic review of that season was that it was okay. It was kind of had really high highs and really low lows, with the potential to become something greater and a really good series. Season 2 just ended with its 5-episode run with 9 new tales, and unfortunately, in my opinion, it kind of has the same problems that Season 1 did. Now, of course, this is just my opinion. I always like to tell people that, if you haven't watched it yet, if you have any interest in watching Creepshow, if you're a Creepshow fan, go watch the series. Make a decision for yourself. Don't just listen to me. Don't just listen to somebody on the internet tell you if something is good or bad. But check it out for yourself. That being said, for me, it really falls short again, and that's unfortunate because there's a lot of people that I really, really like that work on this show. Of course, Greg Nicotero is the executive producer. He's the showrunner, famous, of course, as a special effects makeup artist, K&B Effects, one of the 3 guys that founded that, as well as, being a huge part of The Walking Dead for the past couple of years, directing episodes. So him taking over Creepshow was great, was a great concept, at least. And I think at the end of Season 1, from what I've heard from a lot of people online, they sent out little surveys to people asking people what they liked and they didn't like about the season and what they could improve on. And from what I've seen, a lot of people say they didn't like what I personally didn't like about Season 1. It seems like they tried to take some of that to heart and tried to change the series a little bit for the better in most cases. But even with all kinds of talented people involved, other directors like Joe Lynch and like great cast members like Barbara Crampton and like all kinds of great people involved in the project, it doesn't come together completely. I think its major problem for me, it's 2 things. One is the writing, the stories that are being told, and the second thing is the confusion on the show's identity, what it wants to be. And what I mean by that is the show can't decide if it wants to be an homage and a continuation of what George Romero and Stephen King, started with Creepshow. It can't decide what it wants to do with this new identity, this idea that Creepshow has come back. Because some of its strongest episodes of the season are the ones that feel like a Creepshow episode, and some of its strongest episodes are the ones that feel completely different than what you would have seen in Creepshow and in the movies and previous iterations. To me, the 3 strongest segments, there's only 5 episodes, there's 9 segments total. For me, the 3 strongest were all directed by Greg Nicotero. The first episode had 2 of the strongest segments. You had Model Kid, which reminded me a lot of the kind of wraparound segments of the original Creepshow, where Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, he goes by now, but Joe King is he sends away for the voodoo doll because Tom Atkins plays his jerk, abusive father, and by the end he gets his revenge and all that stuff. And that's very much what this episode kind of reminded me of, dealing with I won't go into too many spoilers on things if you haven't checked it out, but dealing with a kid and kind of who's into monster movies, and then something happens in his life, and he's stuck with his aunt, and then his aunt's jerk abusive husband. Ultimately, the kid figures out a way, because it's Creepshow, to kind of get revenge. And I think this segment really worked. For me, like I said, it reminded me so much of that wraparound segment. I don't know if that was intentional or not. And this episode's segments, actually, and I'm completely speculating, but they feel the most kind of personal, maybe, to Greg Nicotero. The first one dealing with a kid who's really into monster movies and makeup and all kinds of, cool classic horror stuff like that. And the second one is called Public Television of the Dead, and it's got so many homages. It's basically an Evil Dead shortened, episode. It's a huge homage to Evil Dead. I believe it was written by Rob Schraub. And then on top of that, it takes place in Pittsburgh, where, Greg Nicotero is from and kind of grew up. It takes place in the 70s, so it feels kind of like the opening of Dawn of the Dead, with that TV station opening in Pittsburgh, but it's also kind of an Evil Dead episode, which of course, a lot of the stuff that came from Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2 were the works of Greg Nicotero, Howard Berger, Bob Kurtzman, all those guys that went on to form K&B. So both these segments together feel, again, maybe this is just me connecting the pieces, but they feel like kind of something Greg Nicotero is drawing from. The first segment, Model Kid, does kind of drag a little bit. In the middle, it almost feels like that's why it worked as kind of a wraparound in the original Creepshow instead of like its own 22, minute thing. But when it works, it really works. The revenge aspect of it is really enjoyable. And also they seem to want to kind of bring in those classic almost recreations of comic panels that Creepshow's known for. The kind of gels, those certain colors that pop, and like the scream pages where it's like somebody screaming and it's a frame with, a kind of comic book image behind them. And they try to replicate that more. And I wonder if that was kind of a note they got, as people wanted it to feel more like Creepshow. And so they tried to kind of incorporate it. In the first episode, the first segment, it really, really works for the story that they're telling. Overall, it's a pretty good segment. Like I said, drags a little bit in the middle, but I think overall it was really solid. Now, the second segment, Public Television of the Dead, like I said, it's an Evil Dead homage. It's really funny, really well put together. There's, a Bob Ross type character in it, and it's really kind of entertaining to see him fight the Deadites from Evil Dead, people possessed by, from the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, all that stuff. And Ted Raimi's in it, as himself. To all you Evil Dead nerds out there like me, you know how awesome that is. It's a lot of great stuff. My biggest problem with the segment is it doesn't feel like Creepshow. This feels like something out of Evil Dead. It feels like something out of Ash vs. Evil Dead, or, something like that. And so it doesn't really work as a Creepshow segment. And so whenever they try to incorporate some of those, like, like the splash pages or whatever they're called, however you want to phrase it, those kind of images of people screaming or things happening with like the gels behind them, whenever they try to incorporate that into this episode, it feels out of place because it doesn't feel like a Creepshow episode. But that being said, it's still really enjoyable. I'm not gonna sit here and nitpick it and say it was terrible because it feels like Evil Dead's supposed to be Creepshow. Like, I get it. I still had a lot of fun with it. It was enjoyable. But I think, in a weird way, the things I was asking for in season 1, more kind of Creepshow feeling, they don't work with this segment. It was a segment where I watched it and I would go, that was a lot of fun. I wish it had less Creepshow feeling. So I know that's kind of frustrating. It was frustrating for me to feel that way. That's how I felt. I think if it was just a standalone 22-minute, Evil Dead homage with none of that kind of Creepshow, flair to it, I think it would have been great. The Creepshow flair kind of detracts for a little bit for me, but still, a really solid first episode for the season. The other episode that I thought was really fantastic this season was the final and 5th episode of the season, called Night of the Living Late Show, which I don't really understand the title. Maybe it's something I completely missed, but when I heard that title, I thought maybe it was going to be a, some sort of talk show thing. It feels weird that it's called that because it has no connection to anything with that. And I was confused. Maybe somebody out there understood the reference and can point it out to me. Maybe it's something I missed. But the episode itself is really solid. It involves Justin Long, who has invented this machine where basically it's a virtual reality kind of pod. You sit in it, kind of looks like a tanning booth. You sit in it and it can put you into any movie you would like to. Justin Long's character is obsessed with the Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee 70s, I believe, horror movie, The Horror Express, which admittedly I've never seen, but watching this episode made me really want to see it. And so he likes to jump into that, but he's also married to his wife, and there's this question of, did he marry her just for her money, or does he really love her? And I won't exactly say where the episode goes from there, but I think it was a really, really, really well done episode, and it does not feel like Creepshow. That's the interesting thing. You've got 2 very different episodes, 3 segments total that I think are the best of the season, and none of them feel the same. And so that's kind of where these problems come in. Because on one hand, Part of me wishes, oh, I wish every episode was more like Model Kid. On the other hand, I like the fact that this episode has nothing to do with Creepshow, ultimately. There's no, as far as I can remember, there really aren't any of those kind of like comic book pages or anything like that. It's just a story being told. It's really, really well done. It's still kind of your classic EC Comics. The person kind of gets what's coming to them. It's a morality tale, that type of thing. But it's different. It doesn't feel like they're trying to emulate Creepshow. It feels like its own thing. And so I almost wish the series would go more in this direction, where it's just telling whatever stories it wants. Maybe introduce it with the creep at the beginning, have the creep close out the episode, and that's it. Maybe you kind of drop a lot of the comic book aspects of it. As much as I want that to be what Creepshow is, if you can't make solid episodes with that motif, with that style, it kind of drags the series down, in my opinion. So I'd rather them just kind of go, all right, we tried this whole, homage or continuation to what George and Romero and Stephen King and everybody did. Now let's just have fun, make our own show. And so because of that, I have mixed feelings this season about, which direction I think the show should go. Now, I do feel like this episode kind of drags a little bit. I think a lot of that has to do with a shuffling of episodes. There was supposed to be a 10th segment. They cut it out and just made it 9 segments. And I think that the problem with this episode is it feels like there's a lot of filler. The creep segment at the beginning where you're kind of seeing him in a VR world doesn't work. It's really kind of lame, to be honest with you, and it goes on for way too long, and it feels like they added that in as filler. I feel like they animated the creep and then they had someone do some like quick 3D stuff to look like he's playing a VR game, and it didn't work for me. The other problem I had with this episode is because characters can jump into movies, our main character spends a lot of time in Horror Express, but then there are just scenes of Horror Express without Justin Long kind of being there, where we're just watching people act and then he kind of pops up. And so I feel like some of that was kind of added in to kind of, well, we need to stretch this runtime a little bit. That's the only downfall of the episode to me. I think that's the biggest problem with it, is it just kind of feels like there's padding. But as a story, I think it's the most interesting. I think it's one of the most well acted this season. I think it's one of the most well told. And all of these were directed by Greg Nicotero, who, again, I think has a better grasp on the show. Although he did direct a really kind of poor episode this season, in my opinion, called Pesticide, that I think was really, really just kind of, it didn't quite work as a show, as an episode. And I think that's kind of where I land with the rest of these episodes. Every single one of them, except for one episode that I think was just terrible all around, every episode has its pros and its cons. There's an episode directed by Joe Lynch, which is like a space kind of episode that is made to kind of look like it's like a 50s space movie to some degree. There's some cool practical effects in that. It is a morality tale, which I kind of liked. But a lot of the episode, to me, just kind of falls flat. And I did not like the ending at all. I like those morality tales, but to me, the way that the turn of events of things, the very final moments, didn't come together for me. But again, some cool practical effects with some creature designs and things like that. Again, some of the other segments, there's one called Dead and Breakfast, which involves, this brother-sister duo who run a bed and breakfast where supposedly some murders took place and the things that kind of happen throughout that. The story's just okay. By the end of it, it's kind of got a hat-on-a-hat type of ending where it's like, this thing happens, and this thing happens, and this thing happens. And so that episode didn't really come together. Again, that segment I talked about called Pesticide, which Greg Nicotero directed, it just doesn't have a clear vision. It doesn't quite make a case for whatever kind of morality it's trying to tell. It seems like it's just kind of a mishmash of ideas, and they never quite made the script work completely. There's a Lovecraft homage called Within the Walls of Madness, and again, that just feels like a Lovecraft story, and they kind of tried to bring it into Creepshow. It's okay. And that's just kind of my feeling. Besides those 3 segments I talked about, which leaves you with 6 other segments, everything else was just kind of either okay or meh. There was nothing about it that made me go, I wanted to tune in every week to see. I tuned in because I love Creepshow. And so I think that was the problem. I even turned to my fiance at one point and I was like, it's a shame, because if this was any other anthology series, I probably would have stopped watching it, because these episodes have just been so mediocre to bad. And they just don't have solid stories. That's the main problem, is none of these stories really connect with either telling a good story or telling a good Creepshow segment. They're kind of stuck in between. So I think for a season 3, the series really needs to put its foot down and decide, are we going to do our own thing, or are we going to be essentially a Creepshow 3, a TV show version of Creepshow? What I will say is they totally need to avoid episodes in the future like sibling rivalry. I think that this was, and I hate saying this because I know how hard people work on shows and movies, and nobody sets out to make a bad episode. But of all of the episodes of Creepshow we've had so far, sibling rivalry is flat out the worst. It's terrible in terms of the writing. The characters are really annoying. It's over the top, but not in a good way. It's really hammy. None of the jokes land. It's predictable. Within like the first minute or two, again, my fiance and I were sitting there and she's like, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen. This, and this. And we were like, yeah, no, that's exactly it. And by the end of the episode, it was like, yeah, well, no, duh. That's exactly where this is going. I won't spoil it, although you probably can figure it out right away. Just a bad episode. It needed like a huge rewrite. They needed to start from square one with the script, because it just doesn't work. Again, it's one of those episodes where you have nobody to root for or nobody to root against. Everybody's unlikable. Everybody is kind of hamming it up, but not in a completely fun way. The script thinks it's more clever than it actually is. It's just not well put together. Again, I hate saying stuff like that. I don't like being that critical or rude to people on the internet, because everybody works super hard on TV shows. But for me, that episode is just kind of the epitome of what I don't want to see in Creepshow going forward. So to wrap this up, I think if you liked Creepshow Season 1, I think you'll like this season. I've seen a lot of people who have a different opinion than me. A lot of people have been talking about it on, Twitter and Instagram and stuff. A lot of people have been praising the episodes. They go out there and they say, oh my gosh, I loved this episode. I really enjoyed it. And that's great. I'm glad that people are enjoying it. For me, as a fan of the movies, and I thought Season 1 had potential, although it kind of fell flat for me, I was really hoping that this season would kind of pick it up. And to me, it was just more of the same. They tried to kind of tweak things to make it feel more like Creepshow by adding elements, but they didn't focus on what the most important aspect of Creepshow is, which is the stories. The stories that you're telling have to be the most important thing. And again, if you got bad stories or just kind of mediocre stories, it doesn't matter how much kind of, flair and style you bring to it, it's still gonna kind of be mediocre. It's just kind of gonna be average. But that's just my opinion. Again, go out there, watch Creepshow Season 2 for yourself. Let me know what you think. Did you enjoy Season 2? Did you like Season 1 more? Did you like Season 2? Do you think they're both good? Do you think they're both bad? Let me know in the comments. And have a discussion. It's, again, just if you like something or if you don't like something, doesn't mean one opinion is wrong. It's just an opinion. So discuss in the comments. I'd love to hear what people have to say. On top of that, if you want to see more episodes like this, check out some of my other impromptu reviews. Again, I talked about Creepshow Season 1 a while ago. You can check that out. You can also check out Fright Films, which is my horror movie analytical show where I break horror movies down and kind of discuss some of the behind the scenes and who the people are and why movies work or why they don't in some cases. You can also check out some of my artwork videos, all kinds of stuff on the channel. So please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this. It really helps me out. Like this video if you can, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.